Welcome to the Mixing Babies and Business podcast. I'm your host, Amy Lynch. I'm covering all things parenthood, business, flexible, and remote work with kids. Think of it as your virtual village where you can tune into stories from other business and community leaders who also happen to be parents negotiating for their needs, taking up space, and navigating the future of work. Season 6 is sponsored by the Mixing Babies and Business Changemaker program for people who want to do things differently, create an impact, and advocate for primary caregivers and their families along the way. Sign up to learn more at mixingbabiesandbusiness.com/changemaker. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, like, follow, and leave a review online. It helps other parents find the podcast. Martin Barnes is a parent of 6-year-old twins, founder of 8 Seconds to Connect, and graphic artist at ThisCityArt. With 20 years of experience in design, film, advertising, as a guest speaker, creative director, trainer, and lecturer, Martin is focused on supporting C-suite leaders with their messaging and delivery. This is the first of 3 mini episodes of our conversation. In this interview, we talk about being intentional in your communications, mindset, vulnerability, and connecting with your audience. Let's get into it. Thank you once again for joining me. Martin, I have a bit of an interesting connection with you because some people I've met in person before, others I've just reached out to cold outreach on LinkedIn or something, but you actually found me because you were listening to Tyler's remote show podcast last year, and you mentioned you were doing the weekly shop, which is when you do your podcast listing, and you found it refreshing that I was talking about parenthood and business because so much content out there just skips over the reality of being a present parent. So can you give us a bit of a background on what your current life looks like as a parent of 2 kids that are twins and 6 years old?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, I mean, I remember 2008, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I've just left work. I'm in the back of a taxi and I just start crying like uncontrollably because I was just overwhelmed. That obviously was what burnout was for me. And I was super stressed, working too hard, I was just completely trashed. And my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she almost left me, and it was because of a job. And that experience was so harrowing that from that point on, I said, no more. It's just work. And I know that work is really important and we've got to provide for our families and everything, but it wasn't not to the point where I sacrificed everything. And so from that point onwards, I've always listened to myself and looked at my surroundings and sort of said, when do I have to stop? Because work's never going away. Work's always going to be there like tomorrow, but my kids and my family are not. And so I have to be super present about what's really important. And I'm quite lucky. Got, I was in China. Now I'm in the UK. We're actually living at my mum and dad's house. So I've got a massive cushion of support and people around us, which makes me sort of want to be an active parent more because I know that I'm not having to do everything in life that a lot of people do. So I do appreciate how lucky I am. And I share all this because when I was doing the shop and I was listening to your conversation with Tyler and you were like talking about taking kids into presentations and just juggling and sort of like coexisting work and family together, I was just like, wow, that's so cool. And also I'm a presentation coach. And I remember you saying that you had your kids strapped in a sling during a presentation. And I was like, presenting is really hard. And then to put a toddler or a newborn or something within that, it's like it's like creating explosives. You don't know what could happen. And so I was just like, wow, Amy's like really amazing. And then because I was just sort of trudging around the supermarket on a Saturday, just, filling my basket. And I love listening to podcasts, and I make it a real point to connect with people that I have been inspired by as I've listened. And so when I found another sort of very determined, active parent, business person just getting on with it, I was like, that's amazing. And that's got to be celebrated and that's amplified because social media is such a keyhole. Because, our lives are quite chaotic. And people put that keyhole up and they sort of show off that tiny percentage of their life and they don't talk about the rest of it. Even if they don't have kids, they sort of breeze over the complicated, time-consuming stuff and they try to make it all sound really easy. And I'm just tired of that because it's just so not reality. Yeah. And so, I was just really drawn to your conversation with Tyler because it was just, I could relate, I could see my situation in the stories you were telling. And that was just like, like we're all not just perfect,
Well, thanks for reaching out. And I always say to anyone, like, my LinkedIn DMs are open. I share my email address on the podcast show notes. And there's been a few people that have reached out, but it's usually privately. I find sometimes people don't want to share on a public facing post, but I've had people message me saying, keep doing what you're doing, keep going, even if they're not in that stage of their life of kids being under the age of 10 and really hands-on phase of life. It's interesting with your background in public speaking and communications and graphic design. I'm curious to know, you posted recently about not using the words pitching or presenting or really that jargon, industry jargon anymore, and you want it to be more intentional communications focused. So can you give us a bit of a background on how you kind of have evolved your approach to presenting or communicating with your audience over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. It was really what solidified it was last year. I was working with a group of founders and they were going into a sort of one-day conference presentation competition. And the event organizers suddenly felt that they weren't quite ready to go in front of 200 people and present and do all this stuff. So I came in and did some coaching. And there was one founder, Rachel, who, again, absolutely incredible woman. And she was building an app for her autistic son to make her morning life easier. And so I could sort of relate, obviously with 6-year-old twins, nothing straightforward. And during our sort of work together, she was visibly quite nervous about presenting. And when we were doing our Zoom session, I could see that she was reading a script that had been pinned up against her computer. And I could see, she was sort of very aware that she was presenting. So anyway, I gave her some feedback and she took that feedback on and she really implemented what made sense to her. And then when I met her at the pitch competition, again, she was quite nervous. So I gave her some breathing techniques. And then she went ahead to win. So she won the whole competition. And it wasn't about her being perfect. It was the fact that she was just very intentional. And then I'm going to show you now, and I'll describe it for the audio listeners, but her experience kind of made me see a formula that she had enough sort of drive, passion, vulnerability, and no ego that she was able to take the feedback on and be really coachable. And so I've got some Lego blocks in front of me, and the 5 Lego blocks on the bottom is your mindset. And Rachel has an incredible mindset, like determined, growth mindset, ambitious, empathy, all the things that make people successful. And on top of those 5 Lego blocks is 4 Lego blocks. And that's your presentation strategy, your intentional communication strategy. Why are you communicating? Then we've got 3 red Lego blocks. That's your message. 2 Lego blocks, that's your performance. And 1 Lego block on the top is your slide design. So it looks like a series of steps. Most people start upside down. They start with the slides. So they make it really difficult because they jump into a really narrow, constricting tool set that says, what do you want to put on the slides? When they haven't even really thought about their strategy or their message. And then because they put the work in on the slides, their mindset becomes really fixed. I can't change anything. And so I sort of thought my interactions with Rachel really informed this method. It was all sort of there, but it wasn't as articulate. And so I kind of thought, when I say the word present, people go, oh, boring. If I go pitch, they go too salesy. If I go public speaking, they go, oh, no, I'd rather, shrink away. And I thought, well, and again, with my kids, I have to be really intentional when I talk to them because there's 2 of them. They're just here at the same time, but they're 2 individuals. And I encourage them to be very intentional when they communicate to me or they communicate to each other. And so I just sort of thought there's so much baggage with public speaking, presenting, pitching. And that experience with Rachel, I was just like, wow, this is a moment when I can start to redefine the definitions that we use for communication so that we can sort of shed all that baggage and sort of say, what do I want to achieve and how can I do it by communicating clearly? And it's as much about dealing with my kids as it is dealing with my clients. To me, it's the same kind of challenge.
Yeah. Can you get your message across and is it absorbed and responded to? One of the things I always say when I'm talking about my one talk is titled Pitching and Presenting with Kids, because I'm trying to encourage women primarily, but any parent that's the primary caregiver to get up the courage to bring their kids into business settings if they're not already there. And once they do that, to try to, minimize the complications, keep it simple. And one of the things I always say is pitching at or speaking at your audience when you have your kids with you is a lot easier than speaking with someone. Because when you're at home, you're on the phone or you're on a Zoom call or an interview like we are doing now, the kids are going to be competing for your attention. But when the kids feel like they're part of the performance, the top part of your Lego blocks there, they don't really care about the slide design. They just want to feel like they're engaged and they're being listened to or paid attention to. I find that kind of creates less chaos, but that's just been my experience. And I've tested it with 3 kids, but I don't know if that would work for everyone. But I just try to encourage people to think of it in the terms of speaking at versus speaking with. But maybe you would advise the opposite, because I know that sounds bad around, you don't want to be speaking at an audience, you want to be engaging with them. But I find that whenever the kids have been with me, people have just naturally paid more attention to what I'm saying anyways, because they're watching everything going on at the same time, and it kind of snaps them back into reality away from their phone. And I've had people say after the fact that your talk was the most engaging one I've watched in a long time. And I wasn't trying to use my kids as props, but it just kind of became this like almost live performance activism. I always find it's kind of helpful sometimes whenever you're going into something that you're nervous to potentially see yourself as a character, or kind of get into that mindset mode of, this is not just about me, this is about the message, the outcome. So do you have any mindset tips you want to share that you gave to Rachel or that you've given to clients in the past to get prepared to be more authentic and be more honest and vulnerable in front of people?
Well, I mean, the magic thing about Rachel was that when she was on stage, so the format was she got like 3 minutes to pitch and 4 minutes to talk to the panelists. And there were 10 people presenting, and one person would win a pot of prizes like a bit of subscriptions, some support, all that sort of stuff. And when she finished her 3-minute pitch, she just walked off stage. And she had to be called back on to do the conversation with the panelists, because she was just so like, thank God it's over, right? And she just sort of was off. And the judges said that at the end, the feedback they gave was like, we're giving you the prize because you're going to do the most with it. And I sort of said to Rachel, and I said to everybody afterwards, it's you won because you connected. And that's what I'm hearing when you're talking at your audience with your kids. When I was listening to you, what you were just sharing, I was thinking, most people in the audience look at the speaker and go, God, you're so brave. Like, I wish I could do that. And then you're doing it with kids. They're probably like, how is she doing this? Like, public speaking is hard anyway. And then you introduce the absolute unpredictability of children and you manage to make it happen. And people are just kind of probably in awe of the fact like, wow. Because I can't even do the first bit with just the public speaking. And so I say to people, it's like, you don't have to be perfect. You want a certain degree of vulnerability to be on display, because that creates the empathy and the connection where people sort of go, oh my God, you're human. And again, it's like, there is no keyhole view of perfection. Perfection is not actually what anyone really wants to connect with. They want to know, like, and trust you. And they can like you. They can know you through what you're saying. They can like you because of how you deal with it. And they can trust you thinking, well, if you can do this, then you can do that. There's a real sort of transfer of, I think you're demonstrating a really high level of skills to manage time, manage communication, manage people. And little people are really difficult to manage. You've got 3, I've got 2. You know, that probably does so much for your connection building on top of all the work you do. So, I mean, I tell people all the time, it's like, don't try and be perfect. And in fact, I was listening to a podcast from Stanford University, Think Smart, Talk Fast by Matt Abrams. And he had a speaker on, and she was describing that filler words are totally fine because it shows that your brain is doing really heavy lifting. If you get, it's a signal and a cue to the rest of the audience that you're actually really deliberating on what you want to say. I mean, if you have a filler word at the end of every sentence, then it's a nervous tick. But if you have 1 or 2, and so I'm like, you know, Toastmasters, you go and speak at Toastmasters and there's somebody counting the amount of filler words. And they go, you said 17 filler words, which sort of really puts the spotlight on it as in like, oh, I've got 17 errors, which is kind of stupid. Whereas if you think, well, you're allowed to pause, you're allowed to you're allowed to if it's in the performance of, I am super engaged in this moment right now. And so again, it's like perfection is a fool's errand. It achieves nothing apart from putting you on a pedestal that makes people go, oh, I don't think I want to deal with that person.
Big thanks to Martin for taking part of his day to speak with me about parenthood, his views on sharing your message, being authentic, and becoming an effective speaker. Stay tuned for the next 2 episodes where we'll talk about intergenerational living, running a business, and raising twins in an international family. Check out his work at 8secondstoconnect.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, or follow and leave a review. It helps other parents around the world find the podcast. Connect with me online and access your parent-friendly, entrepreneurship, flexible, and remote work resources at mixingbabiesandbusiness.com. Thanks for listening.